I meant to say man.
All right. Okay, so I am talking about progressive feminists and their effect on the ladies that participated in prostitution during the progressive era. So we're talking the turn of the 20th century. And during that time, it was a time of immense transformation for Dallas and all American cities. So Dallas was becoming industrialized, and this was leading to increased urbanization. So people are moving from their farms into the city in large numbers. And then also immigration was up. So this was kind of causing some fears in progressive minds. And when I say that in quotes, white men and women made up the progressive movement. And so they saw this kind of like shifting Dallas and saw things changing, and so they started these crusades, and this was nationwide, not just in Dallas, but these crusades to bring moral reform to Dallas. At the same time, we had a thriving quasi-legal red light district called Frogtown. A lot of the cribs that were located there, which I'll get into that in a little bit, were lined on Griffin Street. So if you go to Griffin Street, it's pretty close to the Dallas Public Library. You can see it there. They're all gone, but Griffin Street was like kind of one of the concentrations of it. The women working in the districts, both prostitutes and madams, saw prostitution have a means of making far more money than they could in any other industry that was available to them at that time. Progressive feminists, as will be introduced shortly, spoke out for gender equality, but rejected the legitimacy of prostitution due to its reputation for sexual vagrancy. So my argument is that by advocating for the illegalization of prostitution, progressive feminists removed a large job sector from women where they, A, made more money than they could at any other job that they had available to them, and B, they were financially and physically independent to men. So it was almost like they were contradictory. So what I want to do is set up, the name of my paper is The Madonna versus the Whore, Progressive Feminism and Its Effects on Women's Autonomy in Dallas, 1870 to 1920. And I set it up that way because in the paper I talk about the Madonna-whore dichotomy, and I'll get there in a little bit, but also there's these two camps. I wanted to stage it as a fight against the two, like they're fighting against each other. So in one corner you have the Madonna, which is the progressive feminist, and in the other corner you have the whore, which is the prostitute or the madam, any woman associated and financially making gains off of the institution. So I'll start by diving into the prostitute and the madams, what they did, what they looked like. We all know what they did, but so prostitution, which is oddly known as the oldest profession in the world. And I say that's odd because considering how women have been largely absent from financially acknowledged labor, being that they were tied together, with one of the oldest professions in the world, I find very fascinating. And it's been a job sector that has provided access to economical autonomy to women for centuries. Most women in the late 1800s and early 1900s chose to enter the practice. Many of these women had no males in charge of them. So some of them they were divorced, they were widowed, or they came from families where their fathers were absent or had died young. Seeing that they had very little options when it came to making significant amounts of money, they were searching for some kind of way to make a living. A lot of them had people that they had to take care of as well, like families or children or siblings, stuff like that. So these were pressing issues. They're trying to find a way to make a living and support people in their lives. Most of the jobs that were available to women, we have industrial works, we have labor in there, and then the rest of it was either like a seamstress or a waitress or something like that. A highly skilled seamstress made about $1.08 a week. But a low-skilled street-walking prostitute could make $5 a week. A high-class parlor house prostitute could make upwards to $50 a week, even more. So you see that there's a significant difference in earning potential. So if we take morality out of it and we just look at the numbers, then we see that clearly this is a better option for them to gain a better quality of life. So, the institution itself required very little skill and zero experience, although high-class women were expected to be attractive, intelligent, and charming to entice their wealthy clientele. I consider the madam like the original boss bae, because she kind of saw an opportunity to capitalize on this and create her own fortune. There are two women that I talk about in my paper, Lizzie Hadley and then Annie Wilson, and they were both madams in Frogtown. during that time period. Both of these women amassed fortunes. I mean, they literally owned their brothels. They owned the land that their brothels were on. They trained other women to come up and run brothels for them, and then themselves become madams. So we see this like kind of growth in entrepreneurship through madams. So I found that very interesting. The madam had to maintain order. She had to advertise. She had to build relationships with law enforcement and government officials. Side note, a lot of these were also patrons of her establishment. So that's why we get the quasi-legal aspect of it, because a lot of these men were actually clients as well. So they didn't want to enforce the laws. Prostitution was technically illegal in Texas, but most major cities in Texas had designated red light districts, and they would, much like the picture I showed you, you could register as a prostitute, and that way you wouldn't get arrested if you were inside the confines of the red light district. So the madam also had to possess skills that enabled her to handle a room full of men, alcohol, and women, and all the issues that arose from those being mixed. But madams had huge earning potentials, and like I mentioned, Lizzie Hadley and Annie Wilson created wealth and status beyond their social and economic classes. The brothels themselves also had many different forms. Tents and alleys housed your 5 to 10 cent prostitute. Cribs, which were the one window, one room houses that lined the Griffin Street in the red light districts, cost about $1 to $10 for a night. With a woman, and then a parlor house with its ornate furnishings and superior liquor and women charged up to $50 and up for a night with one of their women, and that normally included, their alcohol and all that stuff. It's just their whole experience there. So moving on to the Madonna, the progressive feminist, they fought for gender equality, but they were really hyper-focused on that purifying society goal, right? That this included the use of alcohol, gambling, and of course prostitution. Their views on female sexuality were similar to those of the Victorian era, where respectable women had to pretty much hate sex outside of the confines of reproduction. The brothel then was viewed as a necessary evil, where men could go and engage in sexual activity with a prostitute that would be scandalous to do with their wives. So really strange setup there. And that's where we see the Madonna versus the whore, the Madonna-whore dichotomy. The women are splintered. They're no longer allowed to be that one person, but they can't, one side has to be staunchly against that and the other has to be staunchly for it. Progressive feminists differed from their Victorian predecessors, however, by calling for men to be as sexually pure as they viewed themselves as. So in the Victorian era, that they viewed the brothel as a necessary evil. Now the progressive women are saying, hey, if I have to be sexually pure, so do you. They're asking their men to do that. But most progressives created this false narrative because they were so obsessed with this social purity. Progressive feminists specifically, there was this false narrative that got created about the white slave. And it's so offensive in so many different ways, but it's a myth. It really didn't happen. It was, they just couldn't fathom the idea of a woman, a white woman, freely choosing to participate in the institution. And so they created this story about this farm girl that leaves her country farm and goes out to the big city and then meets this man, normally a foreign man. And so there's your fear of immigration, and is seduced by him, loses her virginity to him, and then she has no choice, because once you've lost your virginity outside of wedlock, you're pretty much not, you're deemed unrespectable. So you're not going to get a husband at that point. So then you have no choice but to become a prostitute. So that's how they created this in their mind, so that they could comprehend why white women were in the institution, but also they could become their savior. So there was this big push to save these women, save them from this. So that's interesting as well. Let's see. All right, so then the progressive feminists started focusing on legislation, passing acts to eradicate prostitution. They didn't want it to be a necessary evil. They didn't want it to exist on the fringe. They wanted it gone, completely gone, forever, which we all know didn't happen. But in their efforts, they started creating or supporting the passage of legislation that really hindered women's rights. The first one would be the White Slave Act, or also known as the Mann Act, which passed in 1907. And it stated that women could no longer be transported over state lines for prostitution or any other immoral purpose. The verbiage was intentionally vague to encompass a larger reach against sexual immorality. For progressives that had begun to view prostitution, that expanded. It didn't only include sexual favors for hire, but also for not hire. So basically any sex outside of marriage was now considered prostitution. So here you are, the progressive view on prostitution, it effectively secured a paternalistic model of federally policing female mobility, which equals the patriarchy, right? We all know the patriarchy is essentially controlling the movement of women's bodies. So that reinforced it. So it's interesting to me that a group of women who are asking for equality are also supporting a law that is infringing on such things. And then the second one that came along was the Red Light Abatement Act. That was in 1909. It was a law that disallowed the existence of brothels explicitly and made renting apartments for women even harder. So I lost my place. So it made the renting apartments for them harder in order to prevent them from becoming prostitutes. So this was the exact response that the progressive feminists wanted, the complete eradication of prostitution. What they saw as a method of saving young, fragile women from the insidious brothel further reduced women's access to independence. So now they have a hard time renting their own places. Finally, this wasn't legislation, but progressive feminists were very anti-regulationist. So regulationists were a group of people, largely scientists and law enforcement, that supported the regulation of the brothel, somewhat similar to what you see in like Amsterdam, their red light district. So they supported like venereal testing and making sure that they were getting medical checks and all of that. They supported this, but the progressive feminists were anti this, which is, to a modern mind, it's crazy. It sounds very anti-feminist, and they're claiming to be feminist. But they saw it as they were so bound to their social purity that the existence of prostitution in any form was absolutely unacceptable, no matter what regulations were put in place to protect the prostitute or her patrons. And it's got to be noted that the progressive feminists knew that venereal disease spread to the wives at their home and also to their unborn babies. So they weren't helping anybody by stopping this. But they just viewed it as such a threat to the security of their homes that they couldn't get past that in order to accept it and go, okay, let's regulate it so that less people are getting venereal diseases. Let's see. And then finally, they saw regulation as a method of discrimination and a byproduct of Europe's male supremacy, the hierarchy that they were driven to destroy in their own country. So they even shunned voluntary clinics for prostitutes in favor of just repressing it, like suppress it, end it, knock it out. So the progressives succeeded in abolishing the red light district in Dallas, and Frogtown was officially closed in November of 1913. This led to the immediate unemployment and impoverishment of prostitutes and their madams. Prostitution was driven underground and became integrated into the underworld of crime. There, they faced a far more dangerous environment as the madam system transformed into the male-led pimp system, where prostitutes became victims of a massive and swift surge in physical violence. Unprotected by the madam or collaborative effort of the brothel, these wayward women were left to their chances in the new criminalized sphere of prostitution or leave the institution altogether. Either choice left them less safe, less financially sound, and with less autonomy. Although progressive feminists had good intentions for these erring girls, they may have paved them the road to hell instead. Any questions?
Wow, that's really good.
Thank you.
Man, I feel like you covered so much.
Yeah.
I guess.
I did cover a lot.
I have two, but you go first.
I guess it's just kind of generic, but like, what did you find most shocking or interesting?
So originally, when I was writing the paper, I was writing about madams. What I found shocking was what I ended up writing about, which is the progressive feminists actually holding back. I feel like in hindsight, if they had the opportunity to look back, they would go, "Oh, wow, didn't realize we were doing that." So I find it shocking whenever, morality. I see, there's of course universal morals, but I see different moral issues are being very subjective, and so I found that very fascinating that they were so honed in on that social purity aspect that they couldn't get past and realize that they were really hurting women in these industries. Good question.
So how much did madams usually make off this whole situation?
Wow, they could make a lot of money. I didn't ever find specific amounts. These are shady industries, so there wasn't a lot of record keeping. But they were, significant. So Lizzie Hadley was able to She owned several brothels in Frogtown. She was able to retire, move to New York, and she kept a positive reputation. She contributed, I think, to the Confederacy or something. I don't know, prior to that, or I don't know. Anyways, she was a very significant and well-respected woman, even though she was a madam. So when she moved to New York, I think she kind of just left that part out, and then she was rich, so everybody just naturally respected rich people. So I don't know an exact number. I would love to find that out, though. But I did not find exact numbers. Significantly more, though, than their prostitutes. They took roughly 40 to 50% of their nightly earnings. So, and most of them had at least 5, sometimes up to 10 to 12 women under their charge. They called them boarders. So they make a significant amount of money every night. Yeah.
So during your research, did you come across how these women would deal with unwanted pregnancies? I'm sure, I mean, of course, abortion is a hot topic as it is today, and especially back then, but did you come across any information as to how these women would deal with unwanted pregnancies?
Yeah, abortion was absolutely an option and something that they used. Madams would coordinate that. They would find a doctor that would be willing to come take care of it and give the woman an abortion. Sometimes they would have the kid, and then the brothel would raise them. There was actually kind of a subculture that came out of the madam-led brothel, where the women seemed, the madam seemed really focused on maintaining some kind of harmony inside the brothel. She saw it as good for her business, and she wanted to be professional. She wanted to make sure she was making money and attracting high-end clientele. So most madams were focused on like the parlor houses. So they were really trying to create an environment of harmony. So if the woman decided to have the baby and not have an abortion, largely the brothel, all the women in the brothel would raise that baby as a family unit almost.
One more. Like,
Yeah, go for it.
This is an awesome topic for you to tell us about, but I'm assuming that these weren't all white women. I'm sure there were some that were not. Like,
Right.
Did you come across any people that were Black or Hispanic or Asian?
Yeah, so there were all colors. Of course, white women were normally prioritized. Interestingly enough, Native American women and redheads in particular were the most high priced because they had a reputation for being rowdy in the bedroom, I guess. So I don't guess, that is true. I don't guess that was true, but that was what was said about them. So, but if there were African American women or Mexican women, they definitely participated in it. They were not only not paid as much, but they were almost socially shunned more. They weren't viewed in that white slave lens. They were viewed as like, it makes sense that they would do that. Like the progressives could wrap their heads around why a foreign or a person of color, a woman of color would join the industry, but not a white woman. Did that answer your question? Thank you very much.
Yeah.